Hello and welcome to the Times Ukraine series. I'm Lucy Fisher and I'm delighted to be joined today by REBEKAH KOFFLER, a Russian-born former Defense Intelligence Agency officer in the US. REBEKAH is an intelligence expert on Russian affairs. She's led red teams during war games and briefed the Pentagon, White House and NATO on Russian Doctrine and Strategy. She's also the author of the book Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. REBEKAH, hello.
Hi, Lucy, and warm hello to the British people, our cousins.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. There's a lot to get into. And if I may, I just want to jump straight into some of the most up-to-date developments in the last hour. We've heard the announcement that Russia is to withdraw troops from Kherson. How much can we take this at face value? Is it as straightforward as it seems?
Lucy, we can never take anything at face value when it comes to Russia and Putin. Russia practices disinformation as a form of statecraft, meaning they often just use fake or false information to distract us while they're preparing for something different in order, what we call in the intelligence business, achieve technological or strategic surprise. So yes, they may be withdrawing, but there may be some ominous reason for that.
Do you have any sense what that might be? Some sort of ambush in Kherson, or trying to sort of draw attention there in order to get away with activity in another part of Ukraine?
Exactly. So there could be several scenarios. One scenario, as you just mentioned, could be to draw the Ukrainian forces, have them all in place, fixed and targeted, and then launch a massive strike. Another one could be to flood the Kherson area by bombing a nearby electrical station. And another one, obviously, and this is a very, very dangerous option that even our own President Biden warned us about, and that would be a use of a tactical nuclear warhead, a detonation of a low-yield explosive, either a tactical one or something that's called the dirty bomb. And the military value of that type of option is limited. It's more to place psychological pressure on Ukrainian population and on the President Zelensky in order to compel them to abandon the fight.
Well, I want to get on to how serious the nuclear threat is in particular in a moment. But just to pause a minute longer on Kherson, obviously it's a key strategic gain for Russia, and beyond that, the only major regional hub that they've successfully taken since the invasion in February. So if they are removing troops from there, that's presumably a pretty devastating message back home in Russia, is it not?
In a way, it is. So I would be more concerned not exactly about the message, but about the impact. As you said, it's a very strategic hub. And so you're hampering your logistics, you're hampering the flow of forces because 3 bridges were just destroyed. So clearly, the Russians have decided that they're going to sacrifice the tactical value, military value of this hub in order to send a strategic message. The Russian people don't really care as much as far as all the tactical limitations and all the perceived mishaps that the Russian military is having. It's nothing new. The Russians have never been, tactically superior, right? This is the forte of our forces, of the United States and NATO. We do precision strike with an accuracy of a brain surgeon. We try to save casualties, minimize the loss of civilian public lives. The Russians don't care about that. So there's clearly something going on with regard to that area that is potentially going to change the momentum on the battlefield. And we're yet to learn about what that is.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll all be watching in the days and weeks ahead, following that closely. Now, just on to another linked pressing development. In recent days, Russia has reaffirmed its nuclear doctrine by publishing a short 345-word statement on its foreign ministry website. Now, this has been read by many Western analysts as a de-escalation by Moscow concerning the threat to deploy an unconventional weapon. But Rebecca, you have insight here. Tell us a bit more about what the statement says and what you think it really means, and why some Western analysts are getting it wrong.
Yes. So basically, the statement ostensibly reaffirmed the Russian nuclear doctrine, saying that it is only for defensive purposes that Russia will use such catastrophic weapons in order to defend Russia in the event that the existential threat is looming over the Russian nation. Okay, so but remember, Putin just recently annexed those 4 territories that technically, even though the rest of the world doesn't recognize them, in Russian, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, what's the 4th one is escaping me right now, but we know all what. Well, Crimea has been already before. So technically, the Russians can claim that they are defending their own country from the blistering counter-offensive that the Ukrainian forces have been unleashing on Russia, right? In the same statement, the Russians blame implicitly the United States and NATO for inciting, and threats against the Russian nation, for Russophobia and things like that. So basically, they're building the case, clearing the doctrinal requirement for Putin to use nuclear weapons in case he needs to. So that's another one. The Russians have something called strategic ambiguity. So they basically say one thing, like the headline is, and no, we're not going to use nuclear weapons unless we're defending our own territory. Well, guess what? They consider those parts their own territory, and the Russian Orthodox priest, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Kirill, just announced that Russia is under existential threat. And those are exact words that he used. So hence my intelligence assessment is that Putin is gearing up to take an escalatory action rather than de-escalatory action. And he's just trying to confuse us. He's trying to distract us from what's going on.
That's a pretty bleak assessment. Fascinating, of course. I mean, how likely do you think it is then that Putin could use a low-yield tactical nuclear weapon, or is it just impossible to say at this juncture?
It's very difficult to say, Lucy. What I can say is my own assessment. It's about this 30% chance. There's a reason why they developed both the capability and the doctrine. Okay, the capability is fairly unique. The Russians have it. It's under. It can be under 1 kiloton. Okay, very low explosive power. For comparison, the United States used tactical nuclear bombs. The little boy and the fat man back on, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and those were 15 kiloton and 20 kiloton, right? So the Russians is very small with the idea that it's not going to cause massive devastation, but it's going to destroy immediate targets. The fallout is relatively contained, right? So going back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those cities came back to life pretty much within a year. They were never abandoned, right? So if the Russians were to use it, it would send a strong message. That's kind of what their goal, but it will not destroy that area because they want to keep them for themselves. It's a key strategic area for them. Ukraine is in its entirety. It's a breadbasket of Europe. It's the transportation hub. It's full of mineral resources, coal. So they want it for themselves. Obviously, it's a very serious action. Putin is not going to take it lightly because clearly he's afraid. I won't minimize the fear that he has because we warned him very strongly about what could happen. The White House had talks with the Kremlin, so that's why it's difficult to assess the exact decision calculus that's going to trigger that particular action.
What is most commonly misunderstood about Putin and about the Russian national character overall, if we can frame something as such?
Yes, well, the first thing to remember is that Putin is Russian, so there's a lot of similarities between his thinking and the thinking of the majority of the Russian people. It's not a coincidence, or as the Russians like to say, это не случайно, товарищ. It's not a coincidence, comrade, right? That he has 80% approval rating among the Russians. Still, even as he's waging brutal war on Ukraine, annihilating women, children, civilian population, still has that support. And yes, even if it's, not exactly 80%, right? Some of it could be inflated, but it's not that much less. So the one thing that's misunderstood is that Putin thinks like Americans or the Brits, i.e., he has moral values, he would want to, act rationally being what we believe rationally, and that is that if you push him too hard, and the Russian forces have suffered tremendous losses, right? 80,000 are either killed or injured, according to the Pentagon's assessment, right? They're running out of weaponry. They fired about 4,000 missiles right now, to the point where they have to reach out to Iran and North Korea to replenish its stockpile. And so the commonly misunderstood thing is that if we push him too far, he's just going to pack up his bags and go and tell his forces to withdraw. Well, that's not how his psychology works, and that's not how the Russian psychology works. When pushed hard, when he feels cornered, he fights back. And so this is why my intelligence analysis is that he's going to escalate rather than de-escalate, because his security concern over Ukraine potentially becoming part of NATO far outweighs any kind of economic concerns, any kind of concerns about Russia having become the pariah on the international stage or any other thing. And he's going to do everything possible to stand within that red line. He established Ukraine as the red line a couple of years ago, and he's going to stick by it. That is my assessment.
Interesting. And what kind of pressure is he under? It doesn't sound like much from the Russian general public from what you're saying. But what about the Russian elite? Are they feeling the pinch economically, wanting him to settle this conflict or even ratchet it up?
So they definitely feel the pinch, the elites, and I assume by elites you mean the Russian, the oligarchs, right? The so-called businessmen. Remember, it's the same people who overnight, turned from communist into capitalist, right? Back in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's the very same people who had the hold on power, and all of a sudden they became rich. They could travel to the West, send their children, to study at British university. I mean, London is full of Russians, right? So definitely they do not like the fact that they're under sanctions, that they're losing their assets. But the truth is that Putin is the one who has been allowing them to thrive. Remember, when he just came to power, he jailed several oligarchs, such as Khodorkovsky, to establish, who is in charge. And in the Russian power structure, it's called the power vertical, vertical. It's Putin who is in charge. And so he is allowing them, in a way, to prosper by first allowing some of these, former communist current capitalists take ownership of some of the key industries and key enterprises within Russia, such as Rosneft, such as Gazprom. And so they don't really have much voice, if you will. And the Russian people, yes, there's some dissent. There are some people who have expressed their disgust and their anger and their fear. But they don't really count. It's Putin and his immediate inner circle. And they've been preparing for it for 20 years. So I don't anticipate them all of a sudden, to back out, because if they invest significant capital, both financial and intellectual firepower, developing all of these various doctrines and all of those weapons so they can execute this plan that Putin has had.
REBEKAH KOFFLER, thank you so much for your fascinating analysis today and for joining Times Radio. Thanks also to producer Morgan Burdick and to the technical operator Josh Monday.
And thank you, Times Radio, for having me. It's a pleasure.